Hi, I'm Thomas Broadhead. I'm the editor of the Critical Performance edition of the Ives Symphony. And in this video, we're going to talk about the Indian drum part in the BU, and specifically the places where it deviates from the BU pattern and goes off on its own, playing really frenetic music, and how this seems to clench that the BU is not to free float, but rather it needs to move in lockstep with the main orchestra, because the frenetic music in the Indian drum, when it goes off the pattern, matches an increase in entropy in the main orchestra. And when the main orchestra goes back to calmer music, the Indian drum returns to the standard pattern. So there's an interesting correspondence there. So let's take a look at it. So here we see the second page of the fourth movement, which has an almost complete statement of the 7-measure cycle of the BU. It's complete except for a hiccup in the snare drum, which we discussed previously. But notice what the Indian drum is doing. It just has a little bit of an increase in energy in the 5th and 6th measures with these triplets and this quartuplet. But other than that, it's keeping with the character of the rest of the BU music. Now, this 7-measure cycle repeats throughout the movement for all the BU players exactly like this, except for the Indian drum player in 2 passages. The first passage starts at measure 27. There, it gets off the standard pattern and it starts playing faster music, these faster rhythms here. And it continues like this through measure 31, going into sextuplets and septuplets and so on. But notice during this that the main orchestra has also begun playing more frenetic music. Then, at measure 32, the Indian drum goes back to playing the standard pattern. And notice that the main orchestra has also switched to playing calmer music at measure 32. The next time that a pattern deviation happens for the Indian drum is at measure 59. There, again, it starts playing what I'd call high-frequency subdivisions, these quintuplets and sextuplets and so on. The orchestra also is playing high-energy frenetic music through this passage. But then, at measure 64, the Indian drum goes back to the original pattern. But notice once again that the main orchestra has also dropped its frenetic music for calmer music at 64. Now, in each case, the increase in entropy in the Indian drum is seemingly in response to the corresponding increase in energy in the main orchestra. And also in each case, when the Indian drum goes back to its normal pattern, the orchestra correspondingly drops from its frenetic music to calmer music. Now, these frenetic Indian drum passages won't occur at the same time as the corresponding frenetic main orchestra passages unless the 2 groups are moving in proportional lockstep, following the temporal pattern that Ives worked out. Now, if the BU simply free floats with no attempt to make its tempos follow in proportion to those of the OU, then these passages in the Indian drum will simply not line up with the frenetic passages they're written against in the score. So I think this proves that there is a necessary temporal relationship between the OU and the BU, and the ratios therefore need to obtain with the 2 groups moving in proportional lockstep. I've built into the score a device that will help the conductors of the 2 groups stay in sync at important structural locations, and that's the subject of the next video.